The Hilton ballroom glittered like a damn jewelry box, all crystal chandeliers throwing golden light across tables, draped in crisp white linen. Waiters in bow ties slithered through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne, while NextCorp's finest swapped stories about stock options and quarterly wins. It was the kind of night where everyone wore their ambition like a tailored suit, none more so than my wife Claire, who looked like a goddess in a sapphire dress that clung to her like a second skin. She was in her element laughing with her colleagues, her hands dancing through the air as she recounted closing some big deal. Me, I was nursing a whiskey that burned like regret, feeling like a ghost in a room full of corporate sharks. I'm Ethan Caldwell, the guy they all thought was Claire's charity case. The house husband, who supposedly spent his days tinkering with motorcycles, while his wife NextCorp's rising star paid the bills. Nobody knew I owned 90% of this company through a blind trust, a secret I'd kept for 15 years to let Claire shine. But tonight, that secret was about to become my weapon. The laughter started across the table, sharp and cruel, cutting through the clink of glasses. Ryan Kessler, Claire's smarmy coworker with too much hair gel and a smile like a used car salesman, was holding court. "Hey, Ethan, come over here, buddy," he called, his voice dripping with mockery. I forced a grin and walked over, feeling every eye in the room. Richard Langston, the CEO, stood there in his $5,000 suit looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Next to him was Vanessa Holt Richards' sharp-tongued personal assistant, her eyes glinting with something predatory. "So," Ethan Ryan drawled, swaying slightly from the bourbon he'd been downing all night, "what's it like being married to our golden girl here?" He gestured at Claire, spilling champagne on the tablecloth. "Must be nice having a sugar mama, huh?" A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. I kept my face neutral, used to Ryan's jabs. But then Vanessa leaned in, her voice low and venomous. "No, seriously, Ethan. What's it like being a parasite just leeching off Claire's success?" The room erupted in laughter, a sound that hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Claire, standing beside me, didn't flinch. She laughed too, her perfect corporate smile flashing like a blade. Something snapped inside me, not loud, but cold and sharp. I turned to Richard, whose face was already paling, like he sensed the storm coming. "Richard," I said, my voice steady as stone, "how does it feel to know this parasite owns 90% of your company?" The laughter died, like someone yanked the plug. Richard's glass froze halfway to his lips. Claire's arms slipped from mine, her mouth open in shock. Vanessa's smirk vanished, replaced by a glare that could cut glass. Ryan just blinked, his stupid grin melting like wax. The room was so quiet, you could hear the ice clinking in my whiskey glass. They thought they knew me. They were dead wrong. You know that feeling when you're standing in a room full of people, but you might as well be a shadow on the wall. That's been my life for 15 years, ever since I decided to step back and let Claire take the spotlight. I'm Ethan Caldwell, the guy who built Orion Tech from a garage startup into a tech empire that saved NextCorp from bankruptcy. Back in 2010, NextCorp was bleeding cash, a sinking ship with Richard Langston at the helm, begging me to merge my company with his. I didn't just save them. I took 90% ownership through a blind trust locked away behind NDAs, so tight even the lawyers sweated signing them. I didn't need the glory. I wanted Claire to shine, to climb that corporate ladder without my shadow looming over her. So I became the quiet husband, cooking dinners, paying the mortgage, and fixing the leaky faucet while she dazzled the boardroom. But every choice has a price, and mine was being invisible. Claire didn't mean to bury me, but she did. At every company event, she'd introduce me as Ethan, who used to work in tech. Her voice bright but dismissive, like I was some relic from a bygone era. Her colleagues ate it up, especially Ryan Kessler, that slick bastard with a grin like a shark and a knack for making me feel 2 feet tall. Ryan wasn't just a coworker. He was a vulture, circling for any chance to tear down anyone who didn't fit his corporate mold. At a conference last year, he introduced me to investors as Claire's stay-at-home arm candy, his laugh echoing like nails on a chalkboard. The investors chuckled, and I stood there swallowing my pride like bitter medicine, knowing I could have bought and sold every suit in that room. Then there was Vanessa Holt Richards' assistant, who turned cruelty into an art form. She was all sharp smiles and sharper ambition, the kind of person who'd sell her own soul for a corner office. Vanessa didn't just mock me, she weaponized rumors. Last spring, I found out she'd sent an email from Claire's account to the entire company, a fake message calling me a financial burden who's lucky to have a wife like Claire. Claire swore she didn't know, but she never corrected the record, never stood up to say, "That's not my husband." Instead, she'd smile that polished corporate smile, letting the whispers spread like wildfire. That email burned through NextCorp's gossip mill, turning me into the punchline of every water cooler conversation. Ethan, the guy who lives off Claire's paycheck. Ethan, the deadbeat. Each jab was a cut slicing away at my dignity. Richard knew the truth about my ownership, but he played along, letting Ryan and Vanessa run their mouths to keep his own hands clean. He'd built a toxic kingdom at NextCorp, where loyalty meant kissing up and talent meant nothing if you didn't play the game. I saw it in the way they overlooked people like Sarah Nguyen, a brilliant engineer who got passed over for promotions because she didn't golf with the boys' club. I saw it in the way Ryan and Vanessa flaunted their power, throwing lavish client dinners that were really just excuses to pad their expense accounts. And I felt it every time Claire laughed off their insults, her eyes avoiding mine like she was ashamed of the man she married. The worst part, I let it happen. For 15 years, I bit my tongue, thinking love meant staying silent. I cooked Claire's favorite pasta while she worked, late handled the bills she never wanted to touch, and told myself it was enough. But every laugh, every whispered rumor, every time Claire called me, retired with that condescending lilt, it piled up like bricks on my chest. Last night, at that Hilton ballroom, when Ryan called me a parasite and Vanessa piled on, when Claire's laugh joined the chorus, something broke. Not my heart, my patience. I wasn't just Ethan, the invisible husband. I was Ethan Caldwell, the man who owned their world, and I was done playing nice. The silence in the Hilton ballroom was deafening, like the air had been sucked out of the room after I dropped the bomb about owning 90% of NextCorp. Ryan Kessler's smug grin froze his champagne glass, tilting in his hand, like he'd forgotten how to hold it. Vanessa Holt's eyes narrowed her smirk, twisting into something venomous, like a snake ready to strike. Richard Langston, the CEO, who'd known my secret all along, looked like he'd seen a ghost, his face pale as the linen tablecloth. And Claire, my wife of 15 years, just stared at me, her sapphire dress suddenly looking too tight, her corporate smile shattered. The laughter that had cut me like a blade seconds ago was gone, replaced by a tension so thick you could choke on it. Ryan recovered first, letting out a forced laugh that sounded like a dying engine. "Nice one, Ethan." He said his voice loud enough to draw eyes from nearby tables. "What's next? You gonna tell us you're secretly a billionaire?" He turned to the crowd, expecting them to laugh with him. Vanessa leaned in, her voice dripping with acid. Yeah, Ethan, save the fairy tales for someone who cares. You're embarrassing Claire with this nonsense. The room stayed quiet, but a few nervous chuckles flickered. I looked at Claire, waiting for her to say something, anything to shut them down. Instead, she grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a corner of the ballroom, her heels clicking like gunfire on the marble floor. Ethan, what the hell was that? She hissed, her eyes flashing with panic and anger. You can't just say stuff like that. This is my company, my career. You're making me look like a fool. Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Not an apology, not a defense of her husband, but a scolding, like I was a kid who'd spilled juice on her perfect life. Your company, I said, my voice low, but sharp. Claire, you laughed when they called me a parasite. You stood there and let them tear me apart. And now you're worried about your reputation. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, just a flicker of guilt she quickly buried under that corporate mask. I turned to leave, but something stopped me, a hushed conversation filtering through the crowd. I edged closer to a hallway near the bar where Ryan and Vanessa were whispering like conspirators in a bad spy movie. He's bluffing, Ryan muttered, his voice slurred from too many drinks. No way that loser owns anything. We've got the construction contracts locked down, $5 million and counting. He'll never know. Vanessa nodded, her smile cold as ice. Richard's too spineless to snitch. And Claire, she's too busy playing queen bee to notice her company's bleeding cash. My blood ran cold. $5 million siphoned through fake contracts with Ryan's cousin's construction firm. They weren't just mocking me, they were stealing from the company I built. Later that night, in the dim light of my home office, I found something worse. Tucked in a locked drawer behind years of tax returns was a file I'd buried after the Orion Tech merger. It wasn't just financials. It was a report NextCorp had buried detailing how they'd illegally dumped toxic waste into a local river, poisoning a small town's water supply. Kids were getting sick. Families were losing homes, and Richard, Ryan, and Vanessa had covered it up to protect stock prices. Claire's initials were on a memo approving the silence, not because she agreed, but because she didn't want to rock the boat. She knew. She knew, and chose her career over those people's lives. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was a knife in the heart of everything I thought we stood for. My hand shook as I closed the file. This wasn't just about me now. It was about justice. The weight of that file in my hands felt like a grenade, its pin already pulled. Evidence of NextCorp's toxic waste dumping, kids sick, families displaced, and Claire's initials on a memo that buried it all. Ryan Kessler and Vanessa Holt's embezzlement schemes siphoning millions through fake contracts. Richard Langston's spineless silence letting it all happen under my nose. My company, my legacy, and my wife laughing while they called me a parasite. I sat in my home office, the man cave Claire mocked, staring at the papers spread across my desk like a royal flush in a high-stakes poker game. The quiet Ethan Caldwell was dead. It was time to remind them who they'd been screwing with. I dialed Marcus Trent, my lawyer. Since the Orion Tech days, a guy who could smell corporate rot from a mile away. It was past midnight, but Marcus answered on the first ring, his voice sharp as ever. Ethan, you okay? This is late even for you. I didn't waste time. I need a full financial audit of NextCorp executive expenses, contracts, the works, and dig into their environmental records. They've been dumping toxic waste, Marcus, and covering it up. I want names, dates, everything. There was a pause, the kind that said he knew I wasn't bluffing. "This is Big Ethan. You sure you want to pull that trigger?" I looked at the memo with Claire's initials, her betrayal staring back at me. I've never been more sure. By morning, I drafted an email to Richard, cold and sharp as a guillotine. "Richard, as NextCorp's majority shareholder, I'm requesting a complete breakdown of executive compensation expense accounts and all vendor contracts by end of business today. Schedule an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. No exceptions. Ethan Caldwell." I hit send and felt the world shift, like the ground rumbling before a quake. Richard would be sweating bullets when he saw my name, knowing the shadow he'd ignored for 15 years was about to step into the light. The next day, I walked into NextCorp's headquarters, a glass tower that screamed money and arrogance. I hadn't worn my charcoal Armani suit in years, but it fit like a second skin, a reminder of the man I used to be. Marcus met me in the parking garage, his briefcase stuffed with enough legal ammo to sink a battleship. "You ready to burn it all down?" he asked, studying my face. "Not burn," I said, straightening my tie. "Rebuild." The boardroom was a mausoleum of mahogany and glass 5 board members, looking like they'd been summoned to their own funeral. Richard was pacing outside, his face white as fresh snow, when he saw me step off the elevator. "Ethan," he stammered, extending a clammy hand. "Didn't expect to see you here." I shook his hand, feeling his pulse race. "You should have, Richard. This is my company." Inside the board, members shuffled papers, their confusion palpable. I took my seat at the head of the table, Marcus at my side, and spread out the documents like a dealer, laying down aces. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice calm, but carrying an edge that made them sit up straight. "I'm Ethan Caldwell, the guy who owns 90% of NextCorp, and I've been watching you run my company into the ground." Patricia Hensley, the only woman on the board, leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Our records show a blind trust, not blind anymore." I cut her off. "Richard's known who I am since day one." "Haven't you, Richard?" He nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. I slid the financial audit across the table pages, detailing Ryan and Vanessa's $5 million embezzlement through fake construction contracts. Then came the environmental report, a gut punch of truth. NextCorp's illegal dumping had poisoned a town's water, linked to 20 cases of childhood leukemia. The board gasped, hands trembling as they read. "This is what you've been funding," I said. "A toxic culture, literal and figurative, while you laughed at the guy signing your checks." Then came the third twist, the one that made their jaws drop. "I've been funding an NGO investigating NextCorp's environmental crimes," I said. "This morning, they went public. Check your phones." They scrambled, pulling up news alerts. "NextCorp stock plummets, 30% after toxic waste scandal exposed," one headline screamed. Richard's face crumpled like wet paper. Vanessa, who'd been called to the meeting, went pale, her usual smirk gone. Ryan, standing in the corner, looked like he'd been sucker punched. "Richard, your resignation is effective immediately," I said. "Security's waiting to escort you out." "Ryan, Vanessa, you're fired, and my lawyers are already building a criminal case for embezzlement." Ryan opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "Save it. You're done." I turned to the board. "Sarah Nguyen from engineering is your new CEO. She's been delivering results while you played golf and padded your pockets. This company's getting a new start today." As security led Richard out, his tailored suit sagging like his pride, and Ryan shouted curses, his gelled hair a mess, I felt a rush of satisfaction. Vanessa tried to slink away, but I stopped her. Oh, and Vanessa, that fake email you sent from Claire's account. My lawyers have it. Good luck. The boardroom was chaos whispers, phones buzzing the sound of a corporate empire cracking. I stood at the window, the city skyline stretching below, and knew this was just the beginning. NextCorp was mine again, and I wasn't hiding anymore. I walked into our house, the silence heavier than the chaos I'd left at NextCorp's headquarters. The boardroom showdown had flipped the game. Richard was out. Ryan and Vanessa were facing criminal charges, and Sarah Nguyen was already tearing down the toxic empire they'd built. But the real battle was waiting for me in our living room, where Claire paced like a caged panther, her sapphire dress swapped for a wrinkled blazer and mascara-streaked cheeks. The air crackled with her fury, like a storm about to break. I'd spent 15 years playing the invisible husband, but tonight Claire was about to face the man she'd never really known. She spun on me the second I stepped through the door, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Ethan, you humiliated me." She screamed, her hands flailing like she could claw back her perfect corporate image. "Everyone at NextCorp is whispering that I didn't even know my own husband. They think I'm a liar, or an idiot, or both. Do you have any idea what you've done to my career?" I loosened my tie, hung my Armani jacket on a chair, and let her words wash over me like acid rain. "Which bothers you more, Claire?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. "That they're talking about you, or that you laughed when they called me a parasite?" Her mouth opened, then closed like a fish gasping on dry land. "That's not fair," she stammered, but the fire in her eyes was flickering. It was just office banter. Ethan Ryan was drunk. Vanessa was being her usual self. What was I supposed to do? Start a fight at a company dinner? I sat on the couch, watching her pace her heels, stabbing the hardwood floor. "You were supposed to stand up for me," I said, each word heavy as a brick. "You were supposed to tell Ryan to shut his mouth. Tell Vanessa her lies were trash. You were supposed to act like you knew who you married." Claire's face crumpled, but not with guilt, with desperation. "I didn't know, Ethan," she wailed, collapsing onto the couch, her perfect hair falling loose. "You never told me you owned NextCorp. You let me think you were just retired, living off investments, fixing the damn sink while I worked my ass off." Her voice broke, but then she kept going, and that's when the knife twisted deeper. "I found out about the toxic waste cover-up last year. Vanessa tried to pull me into their scheme, but I said no. I didn't report it because I couldn't risk my career. You don't get it, Ethan. I had to protect what I built." The room spun for a second, her words like a sucker punch. She knew about the poisoned water, the sick kids, the ruined lives, and chose silence to save her precious reputation. "You protected yourself," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You let a town suffer, let Ryan and Vanessa steal millions, and laughed when they called your husband a leech." "Who are you, Claire?" She flinched, tears streaming now. But I wasn't done. "Here's something else you don't know," I said, standing my shadow, falling over her like a verdict. "This morning, I transferred 50% of my NextCorp shares to a trust for the Caldwell Environmental Justice Foundation. It's funding cleanup for that town medical care for those kids. I did it to fix what you helped hide and to see if you'd still love me if I gave half my fortune away." Her eyes widened shock, replacing her tears. "You," what she whispered. "I wanted to know if you loved me, Claire, or just the life I gave you," I said. "And right now, I'm not sure there's a difference." She sobbed, curling into herself like a broken doll. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't know." I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for 15 years, and felt nothing but exhaustion. You didn't want to know, I said. And that's the problem. I need time to decide if we're still a we at all. 3 months later, NextCorp wasn't the same company I'd walked away from that night. Sarah Nguyen hit the ground, running, turning a cesspool of greed into something that actually meant something. She opened the doors wide, literally and figuratively, holding town halls where employees could speak without fear, slashing bloated executive perks and redirecting funds to clean up the toxic mess NextCorp had left in that small town. The cafeteria, once a graveyard of silence, buzzed with laughter and jazz from a new sound system Sarah had approved on her first day. Walking those office floors, I saw people collaborating, not backstabbing, sharing ideas instead of hoarding power. It was like watching a phoenix rise from ashes I'd set ablaze. The lawsuits against Ryan and Vanessa fizzled fast. Faced with a mountain of evidence emails, bank records, fake contracts, they settled quietly, slinking off to obscurity. Ryan took a low-rent job in some nowhere firm in Arizona, probably still whining about being railroaded. Vanessa vanished her LinkedIn profile, as dead as her career. Richard, stripped of his golden parachute, was last seen selling his Porsche to cover legal fees. The board, once a boys' club, of yes men now answered to Sarah, who ran NextCorp like she'd been born for it. She wasn't just fixing my company, she was building something better. Something that respected the people who actually did the work. I didn't stop there. The Caldwell Environmental Justice Foundation became my legacy, pouring millions from my NextCorp shares into cleaning that poisoned river and funding medical care for those kids. At our first scholarship event, held in NextCorp's conference room, I shook hands with 25 students from that town, bright, hungry kids who'd been dealt a raw deal, but were now headed to college on my dime. Their parents' eyes shone with gratitude, not because I was some hero, but because someone finally gave a damn. I'd spent years hiding in the shadows, writing anonymous checks. Now, I was Ethan Caldwell, the guy who showed up, who listened, who proved respect wasn't just a buzzword. Claire took a leave from NextCorp, her confidence shattered. I need to figure out who I am. She told me over coffee one morning, her voice hollow, her boss lady mug gathering dust. She started volunteering at the foundation, helping kids with their applications, maybe trying to claw back some piece of herself. We were still married technically, but the space between us felt like a canyon. I didn't know if we'd cross it again. Maybe it was too late. Maybe it was just in time. Standing at NextCorp's awards gala 3 months after that night at the Hilton, I looked out at a room that no longer mocked me. Sarah took the podium radiant in her new role. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ethan Caldwell, the visionary who believed in NextCorp before anyone else. The applause was warm, real, nothing like the cruel laughter that had echoed here before. I passed tables of employees who knew my name not as Claire's parasite, but as the man who'd given them a future. The real win, I said into the mic, isn't owning this company. It's what we've built together, a place where hard work matters, where no one's invisible. Claire sat in the back, her eyes meeting mine, a flicker of something like respect, or maybe fear. I didn't care anymore. Revenge wasn't about tearing people down. It was about building something better, a legacy that outlasted the laughter.